Hi everyone, I'm Francine Bridge. I'm the art director at Poppyworks on Slave Zero X.
Hi, I'm Wolfgang, producer at Poppyworks.
Can you folks talk about how this idea, Slave Zero X, how did this game come into existence?
Well, so that's kind of a funny story. Basically, what happened, I'll tell the shortest version I can, is that Wade, who at the time was in leadership at Ziggurat, approached me about doing some new games using the game properties that they happen to own at the time. And I kind of looked over it and highlighted some things, and then I took this sort of list and I shared it with a development friend of mine called Tristan, and he was making a kind of prototype of a kind of a side-scrolling action game that looks like this. And so I talked to him about what things that Wade had sent me from Ziggurat that were going to be appropriate, and maybe we could kind of like talk about what would we do here, or like can we marry these two things together. And so we did, and we got Francine. We had asked Francine to draw some art for us, and we put together a little pitch, and that was pretty much it.
At the time, I had worked with Tristan before, but I hadn't had the opportunity to work with him on like a full title, especially not like right from the get-go, going from the pitch up. So it was really exciting. I remember I was awake at 5 a.m. in the morning because I was trying to coordinate with some friends overseas for a Destiny raid. And I suddenly got this message on Twitter that basically said, hey, it was from Tristan, and it was just like, hey, do you want to work with me on something? And I was like, yeah, sure, send me the details. And then a couple of weeks later, I found myself putting together the pitch with Wolfgang and Tristan, and it's been pretty crazy ever since then. It's certainly not what I expected to be doing, I guess. Like Slave Zero is a really interesting title, historically speaking, and I think it's going to be a surprise to people that it's been resurrected, especially in this form. But I think what we've done with it reflects a lot of what the original, the same things that inspired the original development team, especially at the time. You're talking about like a period when a lot of shows from Japan, stuff like Neon Genesis Evangelion, for instance, is something that they cited in their original pitch, which we've been able to have a look at, and I've read a little bit about the development history back then. Stuff like that was breaking over there for the first time and making big waves in the West, and it was driving a lot of like enthusiastic interest in these kind of settings, in this kind of genre, these visuals, biomecha stuff that like overlaps with tokusatsu or stuff like Keita Amemiya films. I think there's that stuff has remained relevant. If anything, it's gotten increasingly exponentially more popular. And I feel like there's still a great deal of enthusiasm, which we are also, everyone on the team is part of that same wave, which is still going on like all this time later, and Slave Zero returning in some form and getting to live again. We think it's really exciting. And I jumped at the chance to be part of this when I saw what it was. So thanks again to Wolfgang for bringing me on.
Wolfgang, what are some of the challenges when you take a game and are making a sequel, 23 years later? I know there are some older games. I'd like to use Twisted Metal as an example. Great game when it came out, but playing it now, it's rough. It's really rough.
But we're not actually making a sequel so much in terms of gameplay at all. Because the original game is kind of this Quake era, kind of Unreal era, third-person shooter thing for the Dreamcast. Our game is fundamentally different. So we're not trying to build on any of the design structures that they put in for that game at all. And we're kind of carving our own path here. And so what we are making, you'll see, is a side-scrolling kind of Devil May Cry sort of action game. So what's also kind of nice is that we have had carte blanche creatively to pretty much do whatever we wanted to, and have pretty much complete freedom, outside of one small thing that we had to change to satisfy the ESRB.
Yes.
Beyond that, there's not really been too much of a challenge in that way. Obviously, there's going to be some things that we have to alter about, say, some of the world, or some things that were kind of haphazardly, or maybe they had those people might have had some publisher influence or meddling.
There were a lot of really interesting documents that we got when we were able to access the original development materials. I guess the answer to your question is, how do you iterate on a sequel all this time later, especially one that was maybe something of like a diamond in the rough, potentially the very rough in some ways. But I think like the answer that we came up with was functionally, let's build something new. Let's take like the spirit of Slave Zero, and instead of iterating on it, let's like build up again from the ground up, which is to say we never came to it intending to make another Slave Zero. Like we didn't in the terms of like a third person action game in the same way that Wolfgang was talking about. We are doing something completely different, and we're also doing something different in terms of the narrative. We're not actually, sequel isn't the criteria. We're technically, in relation to the original game, our game is a prequel. The term that I'm informally referring to is a spiritual prequel. There may be some, like I said, we've been able to take some liberties. The setting has been like, everything about the original Slave Zero is kind of like an archetype, or like a seed that we have tried to cultivate into something that is unique, because we feel that what Slave Zero did originally was take archetypes, was take like strong imagery, things that captured them at the time, the members of that development team, like I was talking earlier about the influence of like Japanese shows, anime, tokusatsu, etc. And they tried to cultivate it into something that reflected their own sensibilities. So in that vein, we've decided to do the same thing. We're cultivating something new. Fans of the original Slave Zero will find obviously like a great deal of connections between the two titles. Obviously, like this, the direct narrative, it's a prequel. The other one is technically a sequel to it, but there's other stuff that will be different. There's some things that may expand upon stuff that they weren't able to touch in the original title. We've had there's a lot of space in the setting to expand it overall. So we've had a lot of fun building that out. It's been really exciting. We haven't been working exactly from like a blank slate, obviously, because the original game has this sort of like really sort of unique and impactful core that we've tried to preserve, but we have been building something totally new around it. So I guess the answer to your question is, we're not exactly building a sequel, so that's how we get around that.
So we're sort of sidestepping some of the issues. Yeah.
Sidestepping is one way to put it.
Would you say, like you said, there were a lot of games in the late 90s, like a lot of people forget about them. It's, speaking of Ziggurat, they try to bring those titles back a lot of the time. Speaking of your publisher, what have they provided in terms of support that helped make this game a reality?
There's a lot of ways a publisher can support a game, right? Via marketing, production, assisting in some other material way. But a lot of times, I think that, especially when you're working on an existing IP, there's going to be, in a lot of cases, approvals. A lot of approvals for this color of red is wrong, or this needs to be adhered to this kind of thing, or no, that guy's shirt is not tucked in like that, right? And like character and branding guidelines and those sorts of things. Luckily, I think that the best kind of support that Ziggurat was able to give us was just was trust. What we're building, and that extends out to not only really the game design, which they were excited about, but really just allowing us to make changes, or to like improve upon what was already there, or build that stuff out, or in some cases, like if we go back and we find an interview with the original development team, there's a whole thing where they talk about like they wanted to go in this very specific direction, but they weren't able to because their publisher sort of imposed upon them, Japanese anime, what's that? And so they were unable to execute some portions of the vision that they wanted to. Ziggurat has allowed us to do almost anything we want to in that regard. So that, I think, is the best kind of support we could ask for.
There's a record in those materials of they, at one point, I believe the original development team actually brought in a VHS with some recorded episodes of clips from stuff like Bio Booster Guyver and Neon Genesis Evangelion to show the guys in the executive boardroom in order to persuade them that what they were like, hey, check this shit out. It's amazing. You've got to see this, to try and like shore up their end of the pitch. So I think it really has been what Ziggurat hasn't done. which is to say that they, like Wolfgang says, they haven't been sort of weighing down on us. They've been supportive. They've been excited about everything we've been doing. There's only that one minor adjustment we've had to make again, which Wolfgang mentioned for the sake of the ESRB. But everything else, they've let us like develop it completely organically. Everything that we've done, everything that the team has done has been supported, and we've developed it at a pace that's really worked for us and has led to a lot of really cool stuff. I feel like there are very few games out there that have been like as unfettered as us in that regard. It feels like it is purely the product of the team, and I'm incredibly grateful to Ziggurat for just giving us that environment. That is the most valuable thing that they've done, is giving us like a good environment for producing this, as well as access to all those other materials and so forth. Like, I mean, it's been fascinating to look at the development of the original game, especially since it went through some bumpy times, and we're hoping we can do right by the legacy that they left behind. I always said that when we got the chance to talk about it, I would issue a personal public apology to Ted Naife, I believe is how it's pronounced, was the original concept artist on Slave Zero. I'm so sorry, Ted, that I walked all over your designs. I hope that you can forgive me. I'm gonna reach out to him and send him a fruit basket or something after all this is done.
Well, it's been 23 years. I mean, like and like obviously there has to be some kind of like you said, a certain amount of reimagining, reinventing of the, did this always start out as a reimagining, or did you originally start out with the project as a third person kind of run and gun game?
No, yeah, like I said, so whenever I showed Tristan the kind of what was available at the time, he'd already been making a game sort of like this. So this sort of made sense. Like, this is kind of the setting we wanted, or that he wanted, and it was kind of a match from there. And the original pitch deck, obviously a lot of the concept designs have changed, but fundamentally what it was hasn't. So we didn't really have to fundamentally change genres or anything like that. The only thing that's materially changed, I would say, is things around a little technology, and then just art direction, and kind of improving our designs from there.
It'll be exciting to show off someday, hopefully, some of the earliest versions we had of our playable protagonist versus the one who we ended up with, because there were definitely some shifts there. A lot of discussions of whether scarves or hair were cooler, as far as like something to flow behind him when he's running around. I think that I know that if we're talking about reimagining, like Wolfgang said, that Tristan was already working on a game in this venue, was already working on a side-scrolling. So maybe the biggest reimagining, I guess, was like finding a way that we could tell an interesting story connected to or set in the Slave Zero universe, using that format, using that gameplay format or whatever. Especially given the original pull of Slave Zero, the first one, is the idea that you are inhabiting like an enormous city stomping mech, and you stampede through the streets and crush people underfoot and kick cars everywhere, even though you're ostensibly a freedom fighter. But it's fine. They're okay, I guess.
Yeah, it's a 90s game, whatever.
Yeah, whatever. The approaching that and saying like, well, the very first thing we're going to do is we're going to make the main character roughly the size of a regular human, if a little bit taller, and give him a sword. So immediately, it doesn't seem like the most obvious spiritual successor to Slave Zero, but I think the things that we wanted to preserve the most from Slave Zero, I think those things are preserved through the art direction, through the stuff that we've done with the world, through the stuff that we've done with the story. I mean, we've been able to construct we have a lot of really exciting stuff to do with the story, and the story that we're telling is a lot more like personal and like one-to-one. It's a lot of there are characters and character arcs, and we have so much cool stuff that our writer Miles has been producing, and that I've been able to help a little bit on, which I'm very grateful to him for allowing me to collaborate with him. I think the kind of story that we're telling works much better on foot like that. It works much better for a protagonist who is directly at street level and fighting these people face to face, and we tried to take advantage of the fact that we have that opportunity to provide that foot level perspective of a setting like the megacity, rather than trying to find a way to shoehorn the original concepts back into it or whatever. Like, I think it'll be interesting. It was an interesting challenge for sure, but I think our answer to it is something that people will be excited about.
You guys talk about some other inspirations when you're making. Obviously, you went from a 3D environment to a 2D environment, and you said it's kind of like Devil May Cry. Can you talk about like the gameplay and design and how you'll navigate these environments and the type of moves you'll be able to do against enemies? Brenton, you can talk about your art aspect and designing that with the combat, like how you work in that process.
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, like we were working as far as other inspirations go, like Devil May Cry and character action games, I'm miserable at them. I'm really bad at Twitch-based like combat a lot of the time. I'm terrible at parrying. I'm terrible at all that stuff. But I always have like, I've had a very deep admiration for it and the technical aspects of something like a fighting game. I think we might be the first side-scrolling character action game to have a Roman cancel in it, which is a term that I learned in the process of development from Tristan, which I should have known because I play Guilty Gear myself. I think that's probably the most interesting thing about the combat, and something that's been interesting about designing characters for this game is that a lot of side-scrolling games, especially ones that have sprite-based enemies, you're talking about these days, there's an abundance of like Metroidvania-style titles or like simpler sort of roguelikes and stuff like that, where there's an abundance of enemies, but each one of those enemies may have like 1-2 attacks or animations. We're designing a game where a lot of these enemies have like a great deal of like they're fairly short of they're only a few like movesets short or whatever of being a fully designed fighting game character. You're fighting characters that have a lot of different possible states and options and responses to what you're doing in terms of their animation and their design. So that's been interesting, like adding depth to the things that a character can do. We had a lot of discussions, for instance, about the different attacks that the trooper can have. There was a lot of back and forth over how to figure out the best approach for spinning a tonfa, I guess. Stuff like that.
Oh yeah,
like,
there's a lot of conversation around spinning.
Yeah.
Working. Things like that, right? So yeah, we have a lot of systems that are sort of, like traditional fighting game players will be very comfortable when they pick up the controller. We've got parrying, YRCs, you can throw grenades, you can dive kick, I think 4 or 5 times in a row. So we've got pretty much everything you could ask for in a game like this. And if you have a chance to play it soon, Greg, I would recommend trying out the demo or the little thing that we might have sent you, the build.
The vertical slice.
The vertical slice, yes, the build. I don't know if this is right or not, but this is probably one of the deeper, if not the deepest 2D like action games that I could think of in terms of combat system. I can't think of another off the top of my head, though there might be some that are similar. This is very deep. You've got all kinds of things here. I'm looking at button notation right now.
So that sounds incredibly complicated. Like you guys really want to make something different, like that people have not really seen before, or not really seen in a long time. You mentioned some roguelikes, but like, a lot of those stifle back to the Mega Man days, going back to those and just learning enemy patterns and how the projectile shoots, even like gun hell. It sounds like you guys are doing a lot of really cool stuff with the environments and the combat. Can you talk about some of the environments that we'll explore in your game, like some of the different biomes?
Sure.
Yeah. So the Mega City, as we designed it, is split into a series of levels that the player ascends through. It's sort of like an enormous, horrible layer cake. And each one of those levels has its own sort of self-contained zone. And as the player starts, they are going to climb from the bottom of the city up through things like the residential zone, the recreational zone, this sort of horrible casino nightmare. If you've ever, I was thinking about the casino zone from Sonic when I was designing it, actually, and then on from there into the heart of the city, the laboratories where some of the biomechanoid enemies and stuff are being designed, ascending towards the pinnacle, which is where the ruler of the city, the sovereign Khan, is waiting. It's interesting because there's an abundance of environments that could be considered cyberpunk dystopias in games these days, and I really wanted to approach this from a perspective that was less interested in hitting these sort of like hallmarks of modern cyberpunk, like ticking off every single thing that has to be present in order for people to look at it at a glance and go, that's cyberpunk. Obviously not ignoring those things either, but trying to find ways to make people look at parts of the game and go, what is going on here? That is unlike something I've seen before, or to harken back to the audacity, the weirdness of level design in some older games like Osman or Cannon Dancer. Strider 2 is an enormous influence on our game, and a lot of the team from that also worked, like I said, on Osman, which is a weird as hell game, if you've ever seen it, in which the player ascends through cities that are made up of like inverted limousines and like golden statues entwined around each other. We've got some stuff in there that has some of that Osman flavor. I don't know. I don't want to give too much away, I guess, but we've strived to create environments that alternately excite the player, but also like make them ask questions about the nature of the setting or what they're seeing, to make them stop for a second and go, oh God, what the hell is this? I hope that we've succeeded with that. I'm certainly very excited for a couple of specific levels, some which you can see glimpses of in the trailer. So it's going to be really exciting to see people's reactions to those as they make their way through the city.
On the levels and the environments and things like this, we were able to put together a team of level designers that have been working on Quake mods, like Quake community level mappers. We're able to basically turn Francine's loud, dramatic, strange worlds into functional levels. So we're using tools that are, they're Quake tools, really. So we're kind of building this, in terms of like the property itself, it's kind of a 90s thing. And in terms of some of the technology that we're using to execute these things too, they are, of the same era. So you'll kind of see that's part of the look that we want to maintain, is that since this IP is from those time, from that era, we wanted to kind of make it look and behave somewhat like a game that could be on the Dreamcast and would have released as some kind of really weird, id Tech game or something like that.
My last question is, when do you guys have a set release date yet? Do you folks have a set release date? Is there, the early access? Like, what's going on in the future with when do people get their hands on Slave Zero X?
That's a great question. Please be excited for future announcements.
Please wait warmly.
Yes.
Soon.
Soon PM.
In the meantime, where can they go, Wolfgang, to support your game or wishlist it or find more information about it?
Well, by the time this goes out, I believe there's a Steam page that'll be up. So they can visit Steam, I would say, for the moment.
And wishlist it.
Yes, that's
Comes
right.
out on Steam, please. It helps the developers a ton when you do that. Please wishlist it. It helps them a ton. Gauges interest. Yeah. It's good. Thank you so much for your time, folks. I really appreciate it. Check them out on their Steam page. Slave Zero X coming soon. Very cryptic, soon, but it will be coming out. Thank you, Wolfgang. Thank you, Francine, for your time today. I appreciate it.
Thanks.
Is it okay if I say one last thing?
Yes.
I just wanted to give I promised myself that I wanted to give a huge shout out to all the members of our team who are working incredibly hard right now. The animation team, the programming team, 3D modeling, Miles on writing, Tristan on programming, everyone who's worked so hard for this. And I've been incredibly excited to be a part of the project. So I just wanted to make sure those guys got their shout out, because they're the real stars. I'm making horrible problems for them every day when I paint terrible, messed up looking centaurs and stuff like them for them to make out of polygons. So I'm sorry, guys, for everything I've done to you.
Perfect.
Thank you so much.